All right, so today we're honored to have Dr. Hazel Edwards with us. I'll just quickly read her bio and so we all get acquainted. Hazel Edwards' unique career has combined place-based research with planning and urban design teaching and practice. Of note is a planning study that culminated in a book that she co-authored entitled The Long Walk, The Placemaking Legacy of Howard University, um, Moorland Springard Research Center in 1996, which traced the 127-year history of the physical development of the campus. That project has led to funded research and published work on placemaking at other historically Black colleges and universities in the United States. She is one of the principal investigators of a 7-institution research team funded by NASA. The Habitats Optimized for Missions of Exploration, Space Technology Research Institute for Deep Space Habitat Design is one of the 2 Space Technology Research Institutes selected by NASA in 2019. The Howard team is investigating adaptive architecture for appropriate applications to zero-gravity habitats. She holds the Bachelor of Architecture for Howard University, the Master of Architecture in Urban Design from Harvard University, and the PhD in Regional Planning from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She is a certified planner with the American Institute of Certified Planners and was elected to their College of Fellows in 2018. She has been a member of several American Institute of Architects and American Planning Association volunteer teams focused on developing alternatives to complex urban design, planning, and sustainable design challenges. She returned to Howard in 2016 as professor and chair of the Department of Architecture, College of Engineering and Architecture. Prior to this position, she taught in the graduate architecture and city planning programs at Morgan State University and at the Catholic University of America, where she served as director of the Master of City and Regional Planning program. All right, Hazel, I'll let you take it away.
I feel like I need to shorten that bio. Thank you, Edward and Elizabeth, for inviting me to speak tonight, and thank you to the audience for joining us. As Edward said in my bio, I've been looking at Howard University from a placemaking perspective. I'm trained as an architect and an urban designer and a planner, so place is very important to me. I want to start with, sorry, I'm just trying to get myself. I always start with why I do the research that I do. And so it really comes down to my parents, and they were both PhDs, they were both professors. They were this power research team when they taught at Tuskegee, then Tuskegee Institute, and then later at North Carolina A&T University. And together with, and so here they are in their respective labs, and then their parents, my father's father and mother, and then my mother's father and mother were big influencers because they were all educators. And this house here, or this building here at the bottom was, my mother was born in East St. Louis, Illinois. She went to college at 15, but her parents were like community activists, community organizers that we know today. And so that building was where the community would come together and strategize about different things. And so my family has this really strong foundation and connection to historically Black colleges. My grandfather, Gaston Edwards, he was trained at North Carolina A&T, then went to Cornell University for a short period before coming back and teaching at Shaw University. He, in 1915, became the first Negro architect licensed to practice architecture in the state of North Carolina. And around I think it was 1917, he and my grandmother moved to Kittrell College, and he became president of that college. My grandmother, so my father, his undergraduate degree was from North Carolina Central. His mother started teaching when they moved back to Durham, North Carolina. And then on my parents' side, my mother's side, my mother and her mother both graduated from what was then called Tuskegee Institute, and her father graduated from Alcorn State University. And then other members of my family have gone to at least these 4 universities since the 1920s. One of my uncles attended Howard. My father's sister, there's like 4 generations of our family who've graduated from Howard. And then others who graduated from Hampton, St. Augustine, and Fisk University. So that's why I do this, because I have this really strong connection to historically Black college campuses. And with Howard, I actually, when we moved to Washington, DC, I was 7. And so I kind of grew up on Howard's campus. So I want to start, since my presentation is titled The Sacredness of Howard University, blah, blah, blah. I wanted to start with this definition. And so sacred has these 5 different meanings, but where I really am focusing on is to be entitled to reverence and respect, and then 5, be highly valued and important. So Donald Linden and Charles Moore, in their book, Chambers for a Memory Palace, stated that, quote, places are spaces that you can remember, that you can care about, and make a part of your life. And so the basis for this presentation is the work that I did in 1990, from 1995 until we published the book 7 months later. It's research. I was hired to research the history of the campus development as a historic reference for the upcoming campus plan. And we got to the point where we had so many images. I found, and we'd identified 500 images at least, that I said to my co-author, Harry Robinson, this is much more than a technical document. And so we turned it into a book. We wrote a book. 7 months later, it was going to the printer. And so the research and everything was done on a very fast track. And so on the left is the title page for the book. On the right is the cover of the campus plan of 1998. And so the historic reference informed the plan. And we were featured in a number of publications around the city for the work that we did. And this has led to many publications and research, as Edward mentioned. And so this is The Long Walk. So the title of the book is The Long Walk, The Placemaking Legacy of Howard University. There is actually an earlier photograph about 1900, but I forgot to put it in. But over time, the book is organized around the campus plans, and there were 8 plans between 1919 and then the last one was 1988, before, of course, the book was published. And so it's interesting how the character of the campus changes, how the character of the Long Walk changes over time. And so 1910, it had already been paved and somewhat normalized or regularized, but you see this pathway that crosses the main quadrangle of the campus. And so another quote that I really like from David Salveson: place is more than just a location, a spot on a map, and it is more than just a landscape. Place is inextricably linked to people and the things that happen in that location that are meaningful to them. Place, after all, is a social construct. And so that's really how we began to frame this notion of placemaking at Howard University. The university was established, the Board of Trustees got together in 1866 to talk about developing or establishing a university in Washington, DC that would cater to freed slaves and freemen. And so the campus began to evolve. They purchased property in 1867 that would become the campus. And so the placemaking traditions began in 1869, but the university had opened in 1867 in an old dance hall, and this dance hall was surrounded, it was located outside of the city limits, but was surrounded by beer taverns and dance halls. The trustees were looking for a more desirable place to house the campus, and approached a gentleman, and I'll show you pictures in a minute, approached a landowner about buying just 3 acres of land. And this person said, no, I don't want to sell my property to become just a small portion of my property to become a campus for Negroes. So the trustees ended up purchasing 150 acres. And then it said that the early campus was built by the students. And there's, in one book, it talks about the students coming with picks in hand. And then this long walk, the long walk was this cross-campus pathway. And it really, by the time I was a student in 1981, I didn't know anything about the long walk until the research a decade or so later. But it really was this social element as well as a physical feature on the campus. And it was a ceremonial path and mechanism for creating a sense of community. These just keep on going. But it really made the place memorable. And the campus the university was established in 1867, and the alma mater wasn't written until 1916. And it really begins to define and give some meaning to the location of the physical aspect of the university. So on Hilltop High, this is the original farm, a survey of John Smith's farm. That's 1840. This 1861 map of Washington shows very undeveloped area. Now, the green line represents the boundary of the city of Washington, and so beyond that, north of the green line was considered the county, and the blue represents the farm that the trustees purchased. And so again, without the line, you see the urban fabric that was beginning just below the, just south of the farm. And by April 1867, the trustees realized they had much more land than they needed. And so they subdivided it. And then on the right, the image represents the parcels that were for sale. By 1870, and I'm just looking for the quote about why they selected the property. This is one of the highest points in Washington, and one of the trustees said that you could see far beyond the campus, and so being on this hilltop had great significance. You can see this is the main road. If any of you've ever been, any of you have ever been to Washington, D.C. or to our campus, excuse me, this is 6th Street, and then this is Howard Place that takes you down to Georgia Avenue, which goes to the boundary, what's now Boundary Road, which is now called Florida Avenue. The campus was beginning to take some form. In the background, this is Clark Hall, the men's dormitory. Over in the left, you can see the city of Washington is emerging. So this is, I'm not sure why it's doing that, sorry. This is, this part of town had become a part of the city. And on the east side of the campus, you have these buildings. Here is the women's dormitory, an academic building called Spalding Hall. And in the back, there is the beginning of the Macmillan Reservoir, which was land, I think it was about 40 acres that the university gave to the federal government to build this reservoir. And in the background, you see Soldiers Home. And just another view, the reservoir is filled, and here is the long walk. And you see that there's this really rough character to the main quadrangle. And this panoramic is looking north. So this is Clark Hall. This is about 1910. This is where the architecture program first started. And then here's the women's dormitory that I mentioned before. And then students and faculty, I presume, who had gathered there. And the long walk is here. And so Soldiers Home, this map shows Soldiers Home. And so here is at the bottom, you see the topmost part of Macmillan Reservoir. There was an act that was that said that you could not build or open bar taverns, dance hall, and the like within a mile of a soldier's home. So this circle represents a mile from that to, and Howard University was in the middle of that. So it was really a great advantage to have that ordinance or the enactment because the campus could develop without these undesirable uses. And so just going to go through some of the photos. There was no boundary, there was no wall on the east side of the campus. Here's the academic building where those other photographs were taken, Clark Hall, the minor building, and here you see the reservoir with this amphitheater, which is noted here in the diagram. And there's supposed to be a photograph after that, another photograph, but the campus, as you can see, has been well worn. Here is a physical education class that is going through their exercises around 1910. Here's Clark Hall in the back. This is the long walk, and cars are now, well, actually the long walk is over here, sorry. Long walk is on the left side of the photograph, and this was a road that allowed vehicular access to the campus. Howard has been impacted by a number of activities, political, social, economic, and so during World War I, the campus became this training ground for Army officers, for Black Army officers. And so the Student Army Training Corps was the precursor to the ROTC program. And so you can tell that the grounds are becoming even more deteriorated because of these regular exercises. And so to the right is the academic building, and then over here would be Clark Hall, the men's dorm. And again, this panoramic view around 1918 shows the further development of the campus. Oops. And because of the deterioration of the grounds, the Department of, I think this Office of Horticulture and Pompery Investment was charged to develop a campus plan. And so here is the main road that comes in. So we were just looking at a photograph. Here's the academic building, minor hall, the men's dormitory. And then this plan really sets in place the beginning intentions for the university that we know today. And so there were 4 main open spaces that were created. The red line represents the long walk. And I think in this image, you can see just how much distance the long walk, the pathway covered across the campus. And I can only imagine, I mean, this isn't like Chicago with the Lake Michigan effect, but the reservoir, the winds and the winter made this, I'm sure, a very treacherous crossing. And the athletic field to the north, the southern science, the lower quadrangle, which had the sciences, and I don't know if you can tell that there are these buildings that surround it. Here is the chapel. This is now the physics building, and this was setting the intentions for other sciences like chemistry, biology, pharmacy, and the like. This here, this right in this block is the former, or this time it was still the Freedmen's Hospital, which for many years was the only hospital that Blacks in the city could go to. And then this piece of property was, as long as it was maintained as a university, as a park, excuse me, the university didn't pay taxes on it, or didn't, they had ownership of it. And just again, you can see the dotted line represents the area that the reservoir covered, and it's a pretty significant part of the campus. And so this map was drawn in 1921, and there's the long walk. And so this main quadrangle, the university's gathering place, living room, central point of activity, was the location for many activities. This is a survey class in the late 1800s, 1893 to be exact. And this was a tree planting ceremony that every graduating class would donate a tree. And here you see the tree in the foreground. And so this was the class of 1893. And so there were these traditions that were emerging that centered around the campus, but around the notion of place and coming together as a social entity. Minor Hall was the location, again, was the women's dormitory. And this was, this photograph, again, taken around 1893, just showed how that front porch, those stairs, were used. The campus also, the main quadrangle, which in the lower left photograph, was used for football games. And so this is the early football team. 1896 is the year that the photograph was taken. And then later, when the athletic field and the stadium were constructed, excuse me, excuse me, these photographs are really great. This photograph is 1926, and if you can imagine, there are 22,000 people who came to the game. There was this football game that was between Lincoln University, one of the first historically Black colleges, and then Howard University. So the people in the stadium were coming to see the game. And it was a big affair. But then graduations were held on the main quadrangle, and you can see the Clark men's dormitory to the right. The baccalaureate processional is taken down the long walk. And then the university's first Black president took his inaugural walk down the pathway. And here he is again, Dr. Mordecai Wyatt Johnson in 1926. And so over time, the graduation ceremonies, of course, the student population grew, and so the orientation of the ceremonies changed. It's the radial pattern. So the building to the left that isn't in the photograph is called Douglas Hall. And so this was, this pathway, the sidewalks created a really nice seating arrangement for the graduates and their guests. Another 1948, the size of the student, the graduates is growing. The long walk is in the back. Here are the guests. And then at some point, the crowd was too big and they moved to the stadium, but that didn't seem to last very long. And then this photograph in 1952, taken in 1952, you can see just how far the crowd goes. And it's almost to the new Founders Library. So this is 1952. This is Harry Truman, who was giving the commencement speech. And so I mentioned him because almost every president has visited the campus. And so this pathway really became this special place, one that I was told by people who attended the university in the 60s that lower classmen, freshmen couldn't walk on the long walk. It was reserved for upperclassmen and certainly for graduation. But then there were lots of rituals, including chapel. This photograph taken in the 1930s of the choir assembling before going into the chapel. And then the May Day parade, or the May Day ceremony and parade. This is my aunt here. And again, the campus provides this beautiful backdrop to the different activities that take place at the university on the main quadrangle. Part of the 1929 master plan was the development of a women's quadrangle. And so this is one of the 5 buildings that were proposed. And the reservoirs in the background here. And this was a location for different types of activities. This, I believe, is a tea that took place. But this area was intended to, at once it pushed the dormitories off of the campus, but then also provided a safe place for women. And then those are the 2 of the buildings that were built, the women's dormitories and the residents of those dorms. The 1932 plan, this is one of the most beautiful hand drawings I've ever seen. It's in our president's office in his conference room. It's about 4 feet by 8 feet. And all of this is handwork. Of course, it's 1932. The red buildings represent the new buildings, one of which was Founders Library, and a very different pattern to the crosswalks, the pathways across the main quadrangle, or what's known today as the yard. And so somewhere over in here was where Clark Hall had been located. And I don't think that this was the original long walk, but certainly once Founders Library was constructed, the orientation of the pathways on the main quad changed. And so here you can see the buildings of that women's quadrangle. And remember, the Miners Hall had been located here, the men's dormitory here, and now the men's dormitories were pushed kind of to the north of the campus. And then again, the open spaces that were created in the plan. Gates and fences, I'm gonna speed up because I feel like I'm lingering on the background a little too much. But this photograph taken in aerial photograph taken in 1931 really shows the campus set against the city that's developing. Here is the academic building, here is Clark Hall, the men's dormitory, and here is Minor Hall, the women's dormitory. This road here that I'm highlighting is 7th Avenue that becomes Georgia Avenue, and of course the Macmillan Reservoir. And this is what the grounds looked like. They were just kind of miserable, and this condition was similar to what the first students and the trustees encountered. And so this property, again, the academic building, the president's house, Rankin Chapel, and then the science building, which is now the physics building, began to frame this lower Quadrangle, but it wasn't usable. It wasn't a very friendly type of experience to walk across. And because of the slope, it just wasn't a great part of the campus. So part of the plan was to carve out these terraces. And so this aerial photograph of 1931 shows those terraces being constructed. Main Quadrangle up here, women's dormitory, 3 buildings of the 5 have been constructed. That park that I mentioned before, the hospital, Freedman's Hospital. And so this is a few years later, still the academic building is standing, but they've really treated the slope in a very manageable way. And it's been the place for all sorts of activities. This is adjacent to or culminates or leads to the Women's Quadrangle. So this is a place where a lot of activities for the women students took place. And then Banneker recreational field and then a high school was built, was under construction at this point. This is Carnegie Library, which was made possible with a donation from Andrew Carnegie, and it's still in use. And so again, the campus was a place where a lot of different activities took place. This NBC television truck was broadcasting or taping for a show, and this was the first time that the show, I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly whose show it was. But one of the things I want to point out is the buildings in the background, these houses. If you recall one of the first photographs I've showed, I didn't point them out, but there were 3 or 4 houses that were under construction along 6th Street. And those were considered Army Officers Row, excuse me. And so General Oliver Otis Howard and who became the 3rd president of the university, and other trustees built houses to show their commitment to the university. And so you walk around the campus and you have these framed views. This photograph culminated in with the president's house, which was torn down in 1980. And on the right is the pharmacy building. On the left, left is pharmacy, right is the biology building. And these views from new buildings, looking over at older buildings, I think are very, very nicely done. And again, so this is a view of Founders Library. And so, as I said before, the orientation of the cross Quadrangle pathway has changed because they shifted the building. The front door of Founders Library was to the right of the front door of the academic building, which changed things completely. But the campus, primarily the main Quadrangle, has been this gathering place. So this is one of the sororities that was on the campus. And even to this day, or last year, because we haven't been on campus since last March, the sororities and the fraternities would gather around. They've claimed different parts of the quad, and they would gather it and do their steps and do their different activities. And so this is one of the trees, which I actually don't agree with this painting of the trees, but the sororities, and this is Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. This is the tree that they've claimed, and there are others. Almost all of the fraternities and the sororities have done something similar. And so this is the university. 5 of the 9 Black Greek organizations were founded at Howard University. And so this tree is actually painted with the colors for the Kappa Alpha Kappa, which is the the men's fraternity, but it was founded at Cornell University. But this is a view, fairly recent view of the main quadrangle looking north. And so this is the new fine arts building that replaced the men's dormitory. And so, you know, it's interesting that the president and this gentleman here, James Cheek, who was the president from the 60s till, gosh, he was president when I was a student. So I think he was president for at least 20 years. He would just stop and talk to students. And so these students were sitting and talking on the main quadrangle, and he stopped to engage with them. And so I'm bouncing a little bit around, but again, this place, the main quadrangle of Howard's campus, has hosted so many different heads of state and other dignitaries. And so this is in the 1960s when John Kennedy was campaigning for president. And so it was very exciting just looking at the faces, the expression on all of the faces. You know, they were really excited to have him there. But it's also been a place for protest. This was in the 60s, and so there's picket signs that the students are walking in front of. I'm trying to figure out which building this is, but then there seems to be some other gathering on the main quad itself. So this was just adjacent to the main quadrangle. And then protests for the Vietnam War or against the Vietnam War and others. There were protests as early as the 1920s and maybe even before. The photographs that I found through yearbooks or newspapers really showed a wide array of different gatherings of protest. And then here again, presumably in the 60s, another gathering of the students on the main quad. And then I'm not sure exactly what this was, but you can see that the students are joining hands in solidarity. We've had a child care center on campus, and so this was a group of kids that were a part of, went to the child care development center in the late 60s. And this is a Peace Corps group that, again, enjoying the main quad. So I'm going to speed up. We have several pieces, large pieces of art that are permanently located on the campus. This on the main quadrangle is called, oh, I just have that name, but it's was dedicated by one of the sororities. And then this is on the main quadrangle, the one on the right in front of Carnegie building. And so before I was showing you the early graduation ceremonies, this is 1996. And since this time, and maybe slightly before, actually 1986 when I graduated, we were set up this way. So the student population now is about just under 11,000. And so we have about 2,000 to 2,500 students graduating. And so the building in the background is Founders Library. So just some of the landscaping and the main gates and the iconic clock tower of Founders Library. And then today, the yard is used, or before the pandemic, the yard was used. This is a celebration as part of homecoming. This is the musician and actor Common, and these are all of the students who have gathered for this event. And vendors can rent these tents, and they sell food and other and paraphernalia for t-shirts that say Howard University. And then this is another, this was actually a couple of years ago. This is the lower quadrangle. No, this is the same. This is the Quadrangle. Here's the School of Architecture building in the background. This is Carnegie Building, and you can see the city in the background, but the entire main quadrangle is just covered with people. And then this is the lower quadrangle with one of the fraternities celebrating. And graduation, you can see this orientation. And I don't know the exact year of this photograph, but the dais is at the front. This is the Fine Arts Building, and you see that the entire main quadrangle is filled with the graduates and guests. And this is the remnants of the Long Walk. And it's a little fuzzy, but this, one of the campus plan that I was involved with, the 1998 campus plan, called for just one new construction building, and that was this library, which is now the Lewis Stokes Health Sciences Library. And so this is the same place where the park had been located. So they kept a park. Now this is the School of Nursing building. Here up on the hill is Founders Library. And you can, from various points in the city, you can see Founders Library clock tower. This is actually close by on 5th Street, where this street terminates with, visually at least, with the clock tower. And there's I forgot to put the diagram in, but there was a connection with the US Capitol and Founders Library, that it's on, the library was built on axis with the Congress building, US Congress building. All right, I just want to point out that there were many Black architects who were involved with developing the campus. Albert Cassell, Louis Fry, David Williston were instrumental in this period, 1920 to 1937. And David Williston is the first known Black landscape architect, and Albert Cassell and Louis Fry were both architects. This is one of the renderings that they did, that which was in conjunction with the color master plan that I showed. That's a cross section of the campus with Founders Library here, and then the women's dormitory there. Here's the chapel. Then from 1937 to 1964, Hilliard Robinson and Paul Revere Williams were involved with developing the campus or designing buildings. At least Hilliard Robinson also taught at the School of Architecture. I don't remember whether Paul Williams did or not. And so this map on the right just shows the numerous buildings that have been built by, designed by Black architects, from as early as the 1920s to more recently with the Stokes Health Sciences Library. Okay, old issues, we're revisiting them today. So the opposition that the trustees encountered in the 1860s, late 1860s, with not wanting to have a Black college within close proximity to residential units, a residential area, has slightly changed. But one of the early problems and kind of the bridge between that period is the LeDroit Park neighborhood. I'm sorry that this keeps going back. The LeDroit Park neighborhood, which was purchased from land owned by the university. And so you see at the top of this map that it says Howard University Park. So that's the same park that appeared in many of the photographs before. And so this was LeDroit Park, kind of a zoomed in with the actual plats. And at some point in the, excuse me, in the 1890s, there was a fence that was constructed on the northwestern side of LeDroit Park that would prohibit people from going through LeDroit Park which was at the time primarily white, to Howard University. And so there was a Black neighborhood called Howardtown that they put this fence up, this very rickety looking fence on very poorly constructed, but they wanted to block the passageway. On the other side, this community was gated, and I think even at one point had an armed guard. But this was not an armed guard, that's today's terminology, but a guard at the gate. Now this fence was torn down a number of times and then rebuilt, but this photograph, which I think is around 1894, shows the condition, not just of the fence, but the road. So in LaJoy Park, and I'll just outline this area from about here, and then the row houses that are shown in the foreground were LaJoy Park, or are LaJoy Park. The university had been buying property in LaJoy Park for decades to expand their nursing school and other types of health sciences activities. And so here's the nursing school. So this is about 1978. Here's the Howard University Hospital. Here's the medical school complex, the original medical school that was built in 1867, the newer building, and there's a dental school somewhere in here. And then, we've come to find that parking lots were placeholders for future activities. And so now there's a cancer research center that's built on this parking lot. But take a minute just to look at how developed this area of LaJoy Park was. One of the reasons that LaJoy Park, in 1970, I believe it was, the residents of LaJoy Park mobilized and got historic district designation. And so that stopped the university's development. And so you see this nice array of houses that are right on the edge of the campus. Now, 1996, we flew the campus in a helicopter for the campus plan. And so here's the hospital, here's the cancer research center that I mentioned, the medical school complex here, here's Founders Library, the nursing school, the parking lot. The university built 2 parking garages, and you can see hopefully that property is missing. And these were, the university owned about 40 properties that eventually they were condemned, they were dilapidated and the like. And so you see these missing teeth, if you will, that surround the campus. Now in 1998, the university partnered with the Fannie Mae Foundation to provide excuse me, home ownership opportunities. And so now all of these properties have people living in them, have nice houses. And so this, by many accounts, was the beginning of gentrification in this area. And so the most recent issues that have come up, excuse me, in 2019, about a month before, or actually this is the date of this, May 8th, was actually graduation, but people, the students were outraged by residents in the area who were using the main quadrangle as a dog park and not picking up after their dogs. And so it got a lot of media attention. This WAMU is American University's radio station. And so, I'm so sorry. It says, we recognize that we are, President Frederick, who's Howard's president, the quote is, we recognize that we are not immune to people with ill intent that aim to cause harm to our community. And there was a really big uproar about this. The students were outraged. One person talked about Howard as a sacred place, and how could these residents not respect the university. And so the Washington Post, other newspapers picked up this this matter. This is an article from April 19th, so a few weeks before graduation. It was a big concern of the students because graduation, this quadrangle was about to be set up for one of our most important activities of the year. So this is the main quadrangle with the Fine Arts building in the background. Excuse me. And perhaps the worst of the comments was by this gentleman on the right. I'm so sorry. This gentleman on the right, and his quote at the bottom. So if they don't want to be within DC, then move the campus. A new resident showing no understanding of, one, the history of the university. The university has been in this location since 1867. It now has 7 campuses. 3 of them are in Washington, D.C. 1 is in Maryland, but the university is not going anywhere. And so, it was a very blatant disregard for the importance of the university, but the importance of the university as one of the largest landowners in the city, and perhaps one of the largest employers of a private institution. And gentrification, the map on the left shows the area outlined, labeled as number 3, is the area that includes the campus. And you can see that there's areas that surround the campus that were changing significantly between 2000 and 2019. One of the big issues that presented itself, this friction between the new residents and the longstanding residents was this building, Metro PCS. And I didn't realize how many times I had passed this intersection. The campus is north of this property, but the property owner, the business owner, had been literally blasting go-go music, which is an institution. It was a genre that was started in Washington, D.C. But for 25 years, he had been playing this music really loud. And so you could always hear it. And after this incident, there was a resident who said it was too loud for a time. I think he filed a complaint. The company told that owns this Metro PCS said, you can't play it anymore. And the residents, people who supported the business owner, came out. They blocked 7th Street, and there was this huge protest that lasted, I believe, for several days, of people in support for, something very simple, playing music. It was loud, but still, it was something that people had not complained about in the past. And so, this notion of these 2 sides of Washington really started to emerge. So the headline, this is from Arc Republic, the headline, 2 sides to every city, Washington, D.C. in the era of gentrification. Washington, D.C. is a city fighting to hold on to its culture and identity in the midst of rising housing costs, taxes, and an influx of non-native residents. So I'm almost finished with the photographs. And so, this is kind of characteristic of the new residents, young millennials at the time. And you can see the new residential units, mixed-use units that have been built around the campus. And so So that's on the west side of the campus. This is the north side of the campus. The field, of course, the athletic field. This is a men's dormitory. This building here is the business school. And there was an attempt to replicate the main gates at Georgia Avenue. And there's a whole story about this building that I won't go into, but it's a gesture, but not one that I think makes any difference. And just across the street, so this is looking north, and I apologize for the Google Maps sign labels, but these buildings, this block rather, largely set vacant and underutilized since 1968, after the riots, after Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. And so you're beginning to see new construction now. Here's one building. I think this was taken in 2019. These buildings have been renovated. They were able to get facade improvement funding from the city. And you see on the, this is on the east side of the campus. So there's change that's happening all over. Part of it is because of the university. So these are new dormitories on the east side of the campus. Here's the health sciences library. But then here's an image of the new LeDroit Park, the post Fannie Mae Foundation engagement with Howard University. Here's the hospital in the background. And the hospital in the background and some of the new residential units that are being, or properties that are being developed with ground floor retail. And this building here is about to be developed. The university has just engaged a developer and architects who will redevelop this property as both, I think, hotel and residential units, but one that serves the community. And looking from Georgia Avenue West, here, this is a parking lot, one of the larger parking lots owned by the university, and then some of the dorms and new construction. This is the other side of that building that I was just pointing out, but new construction. This building here that I'm circling, recently a Whole Foods market opened there. And the newest building on campus, this is the interdisciplinary research building that was finished, I think, in 2015. And to the left is a building that had been constructed as a hotel. It was actually a functioning hotel when I was a student, but now it's been, excuse me, now it's been turned into apartments. And so graduate students can rent units there. And this is another view of it. The university's bookstore is on the ground floor and a Starbucks. The building just above to the left of the I think they call it the Access building. This was the Wonder Bread bakery, which was functioning until the mid 90s. It was incredibly difficult to be studying in the studios late at night when they were making bread, just terrible. But it was purchased by the university. There's ground floor retail, and then there's also our IT unit is there, and there's also a lab for the computer lab for the students. Another view, you can see on the right, the one of the dormitories of the university, new construction, and these two-story row houses are what that block used to look like. And this was taken as the construction for the building where Whole Foods is located. And you can see just how close this development is to the university's dormitories. And the university provided the developer with an easement so that they could access their site. So I want to go back to this notion, this definition of sacred, and the two highlighted areas are where I think where I land with my definition of sacredness or sacred, that, you know, there's been a lack of respect for and reverence for the university, and then, sorry, I'm hiding the image of the screen. Our images were hiding this bottom part, but a sacred responsibility that I believe the university has. As I said, Howard University was established in 1867. It has, of course, been subject to economic fluctuations, political issues, not only at the national level, but at the city scale and the neighborhood scale, and a variety of social changes as well. But it's one that is now celebrating, or this year celebrated 154 years of development. It's grown. We have a new master plan that was, I think it's still actually under review, but it'll hopefully be approved by the city in sometime this year. One of the things that I didn't mention was that in the 1970s, kind of in conjunction with what was going on in LaDroit Park, the DC Office of Planning and the Board of Zoning Adjustment put boundaries on the campus, saying that you cannot develop beyond this boundary, and so really contained the growth of the campus for decades. But we have now crossed Florida Avenue, so we've gone south. There's a metro station that unfortunately is about 6 blocks away from the campus, the main part of the campus, and I think it's about a 30-foot change of grade from where the subway station is and where that high point of the campus is located. But the placemaking journey of this university continues. With our Madam Vice President, you know, I think that it's clear that this university has educated, trained a number of people who have gone on to do amazing things, not just in the United States, but across the world. And so I'll stop here, and if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.
Edward, are you going to moderate, or do we just go ahead and ask questions?
Go for it.
Hazel, this has been terrific. I grew up in Washington, D.C. and went to Gonzaga High School. And I used to hitchhike to school by this area, and then lived on Capitol Hill in the northeast part of Washington. So it was a wonderful lesson in history and how this marvelous university has grown and prospered. So thank you. My question really is very ambitious in continuing building and expanding expansion program. How are these projects funded?
So that's a great question. The university changed its real estate model a few years ago. And so in some cases, particularly those dormitories that are located to the east of the Health Sciences Library and other properties around the city. I don't know if you are familiar with 16th Street and Euclid, that intersection. There was a building that was a dormitory for decades that, so they're selling the property rights to developers who are building those properties on green fields, but then also in the case of Meridian Hill, which had been the dormitory, the developer, Howard maintains the ownership of the land, and they have a ground lease of about 99 years.
So
And so the developer turned,
public-private partnership then.
yes, yes,
But Howard still is a private university,
it
right?
is.
And so these capital projects are done through fundraising or from an endowment. I mean,
A variety of sources, yeah.
they're not inexpensive. Does it have a sizable endowment?
It does. We do have a sizable endowment, but a lot of these, I think in the recent years, and I'm not exactly sure whether it's been about 10 years where they've been doing this development on campus or surrounding the campus, where the developer, excuse me, the rental of the ground, the ground lease is generating money that then has funded deferred maintenance, renovations, and the like.
Well, the PPV would be a good source of capital for them.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you. And I only have a final comment. I don't know why the city doesn't make, like many communities around the country with parks, no dogs permitted. I live in a town that no dogs are permitted in this area. And I don't know why the city couldn't respect the university's history and heritage and, more important, activities, and just don't let dogs in the quad.
Well, it's interesting, and I don't think I really showed pictures of Georgia Avenue and Howard Place, which is the main entrance to the campus.
I remember it well.
But on the one hand, even with someone who's not familiar with the campus and not had, the history that I've had with it, you can see clearly that this is private property. And there is a sign on the Georgia Avenue side. All of the academic buildings have big signs, College of Engineering and Architecture, School of Social Work, and so forth. And I don't know, I haven't been on campus in a while, but I don't know that at Georgia Avenue it says private property. But
I'm not trying to monopolize the conversation. It was just a comment.
Yeah.
Let me turn you loose to Kristen.
Okay. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, I think probably lots of people have different experiences of sort of how the university connects to the local community. I know that my undergraduate university did have a lot of dog walkers, and that was something they really encouraged, maybe to make up for how disruptive college students are. 3 a.m. or something. But my question is actually, so I was super interested in this idea of sort of the history of the relations between the university, the campus, and the city and the local neighborhood. And I was wondering if you have any insights or thoughts about how similarly or differently that worked with like George Washington and Georgetown, any of the other universities in the city.
So on the one hand, I think that Georgetown, I don't remember, well, Howard was the third university established in the city, so Georgetown and George Washington preceded it. And George Washington University is in a very urban fabric, down close to downtown. There were, a few decades ago, there was this battle between a property owner who didn't want to sell her house and the university, which wanted to develop, a new building. But there's a very different fabric, multi-family housing, apartment buildings versus single family row houses or detached houses that Howard has. And so, and the density is different, I believe, for George Washington. Georgetown is a very different situation or setting because it's surrounded by a fence, and I don't think it's grown much outside into the city, into the neighborhood. And I haven't heard as many complaints about Georgetown as I've heard from about George Washington. I live like almost literally across the street from American University, and I know that historically my neighborhood has fought the university because, you know, we're so close to it that we don't want certain things to take place here. And so I think there's always this town gown friction, if you will, that occurs with universities. The interesting thing to me, and so as Edward mentioned in his introduction, I'm looking at this now as from the perspective of, is there a placemaking typology that's unique to historically Black colleges? Or is this something that just happens everywhere? And so starting with Howard University, you know, as kind of my pilot, and then expanding to initially 10 other historically Black colleges. There are now about 105, but I noticed that some of the historically Black colleges I've visited in North Carolina, Virginia, and in Texas, there is a very, in Alabama, there's a Mississippi actually, almost all of the ones that I'm looking at, but so let me back up. So I did my postdoc at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Franklin Street is very developed, you know, high end, well, at the time that I lived there, higher end restaurants and businesses, retail spaces. The university, Howard University, and other historically Black colleges that I visited don't have that same kind of development surrounding it. We're changing a little bit, but that Wonder Plaza, the former bakery building, that's seen fluctuations in occupancy. We've had businesses, restaurants that have thrived and still are there, but then we have a lot of, and I'm not sure how it is now. So many retail spaces, restaurants in the city and across the country, I'm sure, have closed because of the pandemic. But long answer to, there's always tension between universities and their surroundings. And I think that because we are in a neighborhood that is changing dramatically and has changed dramatically over the past 30 years, we're experiencing more and more problems. And, you know, Howard University has always been integrated in the sense that while it's labeled as a historically Black university, we've had people from all over the world, but the first 4 graduates were white women, daughters of some of the trustees. And so it is, on the one hand, it is an issue of Black and white, but it's not that people of other, of other backgrounds, ethnicities, are not welcome on the campus. It's just that it seems like more and more the people who are objecting to the campus being there, not being able to, not understanding why it's not appropriate for the dogs to be on campus, you know, pick up after them. You know, that's kind of the starting point of kind of the objection that it is private space. It is in many ways considered to be sacred within the Black community, if not beyond. And it has an important part of not just the city, Washington, DC history, but I believe American history as well.
Hazel, do you have any final thoughts for all of us? And if anybody has any final last questions, they're got to get it off their chest. Otherwise, you know, yes, anyone? Or shall we thank Hazel for her time? We're like way over time. Thank you so much for, you know, sticking with us. I know it's late for you.
Oh, it's thank you. And I'm sorry that the presentation kept jumping back and forth. I got to figure out what was going on with that. But thank you for having me. One of my faculty was out on the West Coast, and I forget which university she was giving a talk. It might have been in San Diego, actually, but it was virtual because it was last year. But she said that she's a part of my research team. So she said, you know, she was surprised being out on the West Coast that there were people who didn't know anything about historically Black colleges or what they were. And so, you know, thank you for letting me talk about Howard University. Now, the most Western HBCU is in Oklahoma, right outside Oklahoma City. And I don't think that there were ever there were at the height, I think around 200 of these universities, mainly in the South. But I don't think that they were very far west, you know, certainly not past Oklahoma from my research. But I think now with this past year, not just Howard University, but other historically Black colleges are gaining in importance to people who have not known about them in the past. And so not just because of Kamala Harris, but Stacey Abrams, the Atlanta mayor, and others who have graduated from Spelman College, Florida A&M. You know, we've always known that we are doing fantastic things, that our universities are producing leaders. And actually our president, several presidents ago, the slogan was leadership for the global community. And I think it's now coming to the forefront that, you know, there's a different view that's being presented, hopefully, about the Black community. So that's my, thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much for that closing comment.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Edwards.
Well, thank you. Have a good evening.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Take care.